morning. My name is Miha. I'm from Slovenia, and what I'm going to talk about today here is I will try to show you how Kerberos works. It's usually kind of hard topic, but I will do my best. I hope you get what you want after this session. I will also show some tools, techniques, how to troubleshoot Kerberos, some other scenarios, some group policies, and some other stuff. I often speak at different events, mostly back in Slovenia. I do a lot of classroom teachings. I write articles mostly on security. I do a lot of exchange, and again, these topics can also help you with your exchange environments. Exchange uses Kerberos. I also co-authored a couple of classes and a couple of books. So again, agenda for today. First, how Kerberos works inside domain. So from start to from the beginning, from Logon for computer startup, Logon process, how do I get TGT ticket, how do I get in the end access to the service. I will mention how Kerberos then works inside the forest if I have multiple domains and across forest. And how can you manage these things with your group policies. And I will try and show tools, mostly this will be network monitor, that you can use to troubleshoot your Kerberos problems. There are a couple of very, very common scenarios. I get very frequently called into some of my customers. These are usually new customers. They are saying we have a problem with Kerberos, with authentication, with new deployment. We needed to look at this, and I will try and show some of these scenarios here. Okay, so why did I decide to do this topic? Well, one of the main reasons is the main reason for this topic here is that you can actually disable NTLM authentication in your environment these days, almost completely. You just have to use the group policy. I'll actually show you the group policy that you can use to do this. But the thing is, if before you disable NTLM, you have to test your Kerberos and be prepared to troubleshoot any Kerberos related issues. You don't want to just disable NTLM and hope it works. And the thing is, how it works right now, before you disable NTLM. Well, client will try Kerberos first because it's more secure authentication method. If it fails, what it will do, it will switch over to NTLM, and usually that works. And you don't even know when it switches. Whenever it can, it will switch over. If it can, if it must, and so on. If you disable NTLM, there is nothing to switch back to. Kerberos has to work. Of course, if you disable NTLM, you get higher level of security. Kerberos is more secure than NTLM. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with NTLM. But I have requirements for my customers. Please disable NTLM in our environment. This is the group policy. I will actually show this here. That slide, that picture in the slide, is for your reference. After the course, you can look at the presentation and still know what I was showing. So I will just take another group policy. I can create new one. I can use the existing one. I will just say, let's say, create GPO here. I will say block NTLM. I will say edit. I will go under policies, Windows settings, security settings. Give it a couple of seconds, security settings. And it will be under local policies and security options. I will show, I have to look for network security, and there are a couple of NTLM related policies, like restrict NTLM, restrict NTLM, restrict NTLM. I can actually go and try this policy, restrict NTLM, outgoing NTLM traffic to remote servers. Let's say allow NTLM to remote servers, deny all. There are other policies. NTLM for this domain, I can say disable. and it won't allow use of NTLM. This is how you disable it. You have other policies. You can say don't allow NTLM from other domains that you have trust with, or other options. Or you can say I don't allow I allow NTLM only from specific servers or to specific servers. This is something you have to test in your environment before you completely switch over to the Kerberos. This is something you have to play with. Incoming NTLM traffic, you can try and, let's say, deny on all accounts, deny on all domain accounts, and so on, so on. I won't go through all the policies. Okay, so before you disable NTLM, Kerberos falls back to NTLM if it has to. You want to test this in your environment and see what breaks. I'm almost certain, unless this is completely new environment, if you have an environment that you're just using from, let's say, Windows 2000 forward, I'm almost certain that some things will break. And that can be quite unusual things breaking. As mentioned, after disable NTLM, Kerberos has nothing to fall back to, and you just have to solve the problems. And it's better to be prepared. So how does the Logon process now work? This is how it works now. This is already running in your environment. There is nothing new, even if you have NTLM enabled. This is how Logon works with Kerberos. So my client, I skipped one part. I will mention it. I didn't put into the slides how computer Logon works, because it's almost identical to the user Logon. So in the morning when I come to the office, I start up my computer. It will boot up and it will authenticate to the domain controller. That process looks identical to this. So now my computer is booted up. I press Alt Control Delete if I have to, depending on the version of Windows. I enter my username, I enter my password, and my computer sends this packet, KRB-AS request. I'm trying to authenticate. So what is in this packet? So the PC sends this packet on behalf of the user. It contains my username. If this is computer authenticated, it will be computer name in there. You can see that in the trace. I will show you some traces with Netmon. You will be able to see that there will be, let's say, Mike-PC $. You know that this is computer authenticating because it's the $sign in the end. I will tell the server what service I'm trying to reach. It's KRB, it's up there, KRB TGT on corp.kernake.net, that's my domain. So I'm trying to reach Kerberos ticket granting ticket service in this domain. And yeah, that's what we want to reach. And there is pre-authentication that is derived from my user account password. So I entered my password. Password was put in through the one-way function, and it was attached to this ticket. Once this ticket or this packet reaches the server, I'm down here, the KDC will check its database for my account. It is looking for my account or for computer account if this is computer authentication. Once it finds my account, it will take my password or hash of the password, it will put it through the same one-way function that I did, and it will compare my one-way function and its one-way function. If it matches, it means I send the correct password. If it doesn't match, it assumes that I sent the incorrect password and it will deny my logon. But let's assume it matches, right? And it will, okay, so it will check my password. It's correct. I'm successfully authenticated. Now it needs to send me something back. So let's go to the trace first before I continue. I have actually pictures of the trace in there for your reference later again. I mentioned that the first packet that I will send is AS request. I mentioned it that it looked like this, KRB AS request. This is what you will see in your trace. And as mentioned, there will be my computer name or username and what I'm trying to reach. And this is the most useful tool for troubleshooting Kerberos. And here is another trace. This is not the right one. Let's see. Where is it? Let's see this one. No, not the right one. Okay, that one will do for now. I was just looking if I can find one with my administrator account. We can still troubleshoot that later. Let's see this one. Yeah, here it is. Again, this is almost the same. If that one was for the computer authentication, this one is for user. Username is administrator. I'm again looking for Kerberos ticket granting ticket service in the corp domain, and this is AES request. Again, I not authenticated yet. I didn't get anything back. We are just here. We've sent the first packet. So in the second part, KDC needs to generate and send me back a packet. In this packet are new session Logon key encrypted with my master, with the user that send the request. That would be an administrator master key. What is the master key in this case? Well, password or hash of the password. Why do we use the hash of the password to protect the session key? Well, the session key will be used often, and we can change them often. There will be a lot of session keys going back and forth. The thing is, why do we then need to use the master key? We need something that user or computer knows and the domain controller or KDC or DC knows. And this is the password. The domain controller knows my password or the hash of my password. I know my password, and computer can generate the hash of the same hash of my password, and we can use that to encrypt and exchange data. So, okay, KDC again generates new session key and encrypts it with my hash of my password that it has stored in its database. There is a second copy of master key. A second copy of a master key or session key will also be in there. Authorization data based on my logon. Let's say maybe some members of the groups I am in, and there will be TGT, and TGT is actually what I want and need. Ticket granting ticket. That will be my base for any additional authentication, or whenever I want to talk to the DC after that, I will need to use that TGT. And TGT now is encrypted with domain controller or KDC master key or its password. Again, we need to protect this data, and but this data needs to reside in my cache on my computer for me, and so I need to have some secret sitting in my cache, but we need to protect it or want to protect it. In the next part of the authentication process, we will see that I'm sending TGT back. And the only way that that is useful to the domain controller is if it can decrypt it. And the only way that it can decrypt it if he knows what it was encrypted with. So we need to use KDC master key or its password to protect the TGT or representation of its password. So, okay, this packet is now traveling from domain controller back to me, KDC response. Once I get that packet back, the domain client side will decrypt its session key. How can I decrypt the session key? Well, the session key, as mentioned in this step, was actually encrypted with my master key, so with hash of my password or representation of my password. So I know how to decrypt it, right? I do that. And I will put the session key into my cache. I will use it very, very often after that for any additional authentications or whatever, whenever I want to talk to the domain controller. It will also cache TGT, and that's the piece of information that I need mostly. TGT, ticket granting ticket, to talk to the domain controller. Okay, so these are the slides in there, and I will actually go and show you this part of the conversation. I said, okay, this was the request. I have to look for the response, and as mentioned, here is the response. In the ticket, there will be my realm or domain name and what service is replying to me, depending on what I was requesting. Okay, let's get back. Both of these slides are in the both of the print screen of network monitor are in the slides, and I will leave them there so you can refer back to this the later time. This is for the computer account. It's very similar. Again, I have a request, I have a response, but we are not done yet. This was actually the first part. I was only authenticated. I'm not authorized to access any service yet. This is in the second part. And what server I'm talking to, I'm still talking to the domain controller. I have TGT. I got that from the domain controller. I'm okay with that. Now I can use this TGT and say I need to access, let's say, some share to get a group policy. I need to access LDAP service on your server. I need to access some other service on that domain controller to actually finish my Logon process, to get to the group policies, to get to whatever I want and need. So I sent this packet, TGS request, ticket granting service request. And in this packet, there is a service that I would like to access, including the server name. There is authenticator that I received in an earlier process, encrypted with user session key. Remember, I already have session key. I got it in the first part authentication process. It was cached. I mentioned it. We stored that in the cache. And I attached TGT from previous step to this request. And I sent all this to the server, to the domain controller. Let's go back to the Wireshark, the network monitor actually. TGS request. Here I'm trying to access TGS request, and I can show you here host. This is the server or computer I'm trying to access, and the realm. There are some other examples. Let's say here I'm trying to access LDAP service or CIFS. I'm trying to access some share on DC. And so on, so on. These are all the same. These are all requests. And I get a reply back. So let's go back. KDC, when it receives request, it will decrypt TGT using its master key. I explained earlier when we were talking about one of the first steps is that TGT is encrypted with KDC master password. Only he can decrypt it. And now I send TGT back because the main controller encrypted it with its own master key. It can decrypt it now and check the data inside that he put it in there. Once this is encrypted, it will also extract user session key. And session key is used to decrypt user authenticator, and authenticator is validated. It again validates that I send the correct data. This is not some sort of reply attack or some other attack. It just checks again all the data that I sent back, even if I got it 30 seconds ago or even less, usually less, couple of seconds or milliseconds ago. And again, we create another session key. There are a lot of keys created here. And this session key will actually allow me to access requested service. If this is LDAP, I will get the session key for LDAP. If this is host or CIFS, I will get the session key for accessing the share. And it will be used to access the service. Now that the session keys from 2B, there is one session key that we created here in 2B. I have two copies. One session key is encrypted with my account, with my hash or with my session key, The other one is encrypted with the server master key. Again, depending on what I'm trying to access. If I'm trying to access, let's say DC1, let's say I'm trying to access here the share on DC1, this session key needs to be encrypted with its master key. Domain controller knows the master key. It has the database. It just has to look into it. It finds the master key. It encrypts it. The session encrypts the session key with its master key and sends it to me. Why to me? Well, I'm trying to access another server, and I need to take this package that I received and send it to that server. And the only way that that final server, let's say DC1, can open this is if this session key is encrypted with its master key. There are a lot of every server has its own master key. The server knows it, the domain controller knows it. Domain controller encrypts the session key so that the final server can decrypt it. That's, let's say, every 30 days, computer accounts will change their passwords and then have to notify the domain controller. If they can't notify the domain controller, they will not actually change the password. But what would happen if the server would just change the password and not notify the domain controller? Kerberos would fail. They could not use the master key because they would have the different ones. Okay, so this is sent back. This part is sent back. These session keys that was created, one is encrypted with my session key, so I can decrypt it, and the other one is actually encrypted with master key of the final server that I want to talk to. Usually in this process, this would be DC1. And again, here are the network captures TGS request. What service I'm trying to reach on what server. And this actually, I will talk about this a bit later. This is actually SPN on the server. Server principal name. I will talk about this a little bit later. And this is reply. Okay. Now I can actually start talking to the server. I still couldn't connect till this point. Now I can. I can send AP request. In this request, there is my session key, my authenticator, and also included is a session key that is encrypted with computer's master key. Ticket for the session with the DC encrypted with the DC's master key or the server's master key. And I get a reply. Now I can talk to that service that I wanted to. Either that is CIFS or LDAP or whatever other service I wanted to talk to. Okay. Now let's say I want to talk to another server. I'm now logged on. I got all the group policies. I was able to connect to the DC. I have all the information that I needed. Now I want to talk to another server. Let's say this is file server, server 1. I don't need to go to the complete process that I just went through, but I still have to do a lot. I already have AS. That was the first part. Now I have ticket granting ticket. With the ticket granting ticket, I can always talk to the DC. Without it, I cannot talk to it. I have to first get the ticket granting ticket. I can skip the first part. That was the AS. But I still have to say this part, TGS request. And in this request, I will again say to the server, I'm talking to the domain controller first. I know what server I want to go to, and I know what service I'm connecting to. And I'm telling this to the domain controller. Dear domain controller, I would like to connect to server 1 on service LDAP. And that's about it. I also include some other information in this packet that I talked about earlier, like authenticator and the TGT that I already have. All this is sent to the domain controller. Domain controller replies with information that we already saw. This will decrypt TGT with its master key. It will create a new session key. The session key for this server, because I specified it in here. It will protect the session key with this computer's master key that the domain controller stores in its database. it will send all this information back to me, and I can use it. It will be in TGS reply. Now I can go and say to the server, "Hi server, this is my AP request. I would like to connect to you on LDAP or CIFS or some other protocol. I'm sending my authenticator with server 1 session key, ticket that was received from DC for the server 1, and this ticket is actually protected with server 1 master key. Now it can decrypt it, and it knows that I'm a valid person that wants to connect to it. Once that is done, I can now actually go and connect to the share or LDAP. And unfortunately, if you're trying to track this down and so on, if you want to connect to server 2, let's say, or server 3, you have to go through all this process again, time and time again, every time. You now want to connect to server 55, you have to, again, if you don't have session already established and session keys stored in your cache, you have to go to the domain controller, say I want to connect to server 55 on protocol CIFS, use its SPN, and go through all these requests and reply, and AP request and AP reply, all this process over and over again. And this happens all the time, and I guess you don't even know it. Right? You don't ever feel this. This process is usually done in a couple of milliseconds. It's extremely fast, but there is a lot going on. Okay, so what about this service principal name that I already mentioned? It's as far as I'm concerned, I already showed this to you. Here's one SPN, this LDAP, this is another one, and here's another one, and another one, and so on and so on. Whenever I want to connect to a server, I have to specify its SPN that I'm looking for. And as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most important part of the Kerberos as far as system admins go, because this is where I find most of the problems when I'm trying to troubleshoot Kerberos. What can go wrong with SPNs? Well, there are often missing SPNs. Usually you won't feel this because Kerberos will just fall back to NTLM in normal environment if you don't disable it. And NTLM doesn't use SPNs, so it works. And what do we have to do in this case? Well, we have to go and add correct SPNs to the right account. And now we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes. Another thing that I often see is that there are SPN accounts, SPN names registered to the wrong accounts. Let's say if I'm trying to reach, let's say, DC1, and this name is actually registered on another computer object, this won't work. Again, if you have NTLM enabled, Kerberos will fall back to NTLM and everything will work. And it seems to you that it works until it doesn't. And another problem is there can be only one. There can be only one SPN. SPN name can be only registered on one object. It cannot be represented on multiple objects at the same time. And there are actually a couple of tools, and one of the first one when I'm trying to troubleshoot Kerberos when I get to the customer environment is I ran set SPN -X. It will show me it will go through all the SPNs, and it will tell me if any SPN is registered on 2 different objects. And that's one of the easiest way. I often find multiple SPNs registered on different accounts, and it won't work. Because when I send, let's say, a request to the DC, I want to connect to this SPN name, domain controller will look in its database if this SPN exists. If it finds it on 2 different, let's say, computer objects, which master key does it use? From the left one or the right one? Well, it doesn't use it. It just fails. So that's one option. I can actually show this to you. It won't find any double SPNs in my environment, but I can still show this to you. Set SPN -x, checking domain, found 0 of duplicated SPNs, right? And you can run this, and I think there's another option. Let's see, is it this one? No. There's one that checks the domain and another switch that checks whole forest. If you have multiple domains, it will go through all the forest and it will check for double SPNs. One of the first things to look for and one of the easiest ones. So, okay, let's go a bit forward. Okay, here are some SPNs registered on the objects. I will actually show this here. How can I find them? Well, I go to the domain controller or any computer object. Let's say I can go to under computers, my computer. My computer actually has registered SPN name. Here it is. SPN, it registered host and restricted Kirby host and host name, mic PC, and there can be long names and short name. Here's actually the short name, the net bias name. Here is the fully qualified domain name, depending on what you want and need. This is actually automatically registered once you add computer to the domain. If you look at the domain controller, it will have much more. I can also show this in another tool that is mentioned up there. It's called ADSI Edit. Let's check under the properties. Let's go down, SPN. Here are all the SPNs registered by the domain controller. You could see that, let's say, this was actually something that we looked for in that trace. We were looking for LDAP. Because the domain controller doesn't know if the client will use the long name or short name, it just registered both, and there's nothing wrong with that. One computer object or user object can have multiple SPNs registered. You just have to be different. That's the only requirement. If I want to call the server or service by different name, I just add another SPN there that I will use later to call the service. And it doesn't have to be, let's say, you don't have to match the net bias name. You just have, if I'm calling the service by another name, put that name in here. I will talk about this a little bit later. What are the most common way to add SPNs to the object? Well, one of the most common is to use set SPN command line tool. Here is an example. I personally would rather use actually ADSI Edit. It's usually, for me, it's more intuitive. I will just use this one. I will put the slide back. I will just enter here, let's say, whatever I want, let's say LDAP, and I will say I want to call this server by its name corp DC1X, and I will just say add. And I just added another one. I can try, if you want to, I can do this. Let's again check this. I will put this here. Apply, and I will just put this into another one. It will. This interface will allow that. This is actually incorrect, right? -x, and it found one. Right? LDAP Corp DC1X is registered on these accounts: RODC test and Corp RODC1. Now I would just have to go back and remove it from the one that I don't need it. If that's what's, let's say, the old server or the new server, I just go and remove it from the old server and just keep it on the new one. This is actually how you can do it with set SPN. I'm adding this name, MSSQL service server1 corp, my domain name, and actually I'm adding the port here. And I'm actually telling, in the last part, I'm telling on which object I want to register this SPN. This doesn't have to be the actually the real port. I could just make up something, but this is just how MS SQL Service is actually registering its SPNs. I can have SQL running on any port. I can still register SPN like this, depending how the client calls SQL Service. I will talk about this in a second. Any questions so far? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. 10 hours. I will talk about this at the end of this presentation. Once I'm authenticated, there are two tickets that are stored. One of them is service ticket and one of the other is user ticket. Both are valid for 10 hours. You can lower this. I don't think you can lower it to less than 1 hour, but that means also more chatting with the domain controller. And there is another setting that still enforces strict checking if account was disabled. And it is enabled by default, this strict checking. If you disable this strict checking, user could still log on to any server. Let's say I'm logged on to my computer. I could still access any share in your environment for 10 hours. If I leave strict checking enabled, like it's by default, it will still check if my account was disabled, and it will deny me my logon request even if I still have a valid ticket. But I will show that a bit later. Any other questions? Otherwise, I can continue. So now that we understand SPNs, now that we understand how logon process works, here's one of the most common scenarios. I have a user. This is my domain controller. This is my web server, and this is my SQL server or database server. I want to log on to this web server and get, let's say, my billing hours. Miha's billing hours. How many hours did I work this month? When some other person comes to this intranet, he wants his hours, not mine. So I have to authenticate as Miha, and he has to authenticate as himself. And we are usually using Kerberos in this process, because I have to send my username and my password or my authentication to this server, and he needs to actually extract data from SQL using my credentials. So there is a lot of talking going on, and this is a very, very common scenario. And I find most problems in scenarios like this. So I actually want to go to intranet with fully qualified domain name or only intranet. So I start talking to this server. Actually, I will talk first to the domain controller. And I will say to the domain controller, I want to go to the HTTP intranet corp my domain name, and I'm looking for this SPN. Actually, I'm sending domain controller is looking for this SPN. Right? We talked about SPNs. It can have host, it can have LDAP, it can have SQL service as a service registered. It can have HTTP as a service registered, depending what I need and want. It better finds only one SPN. And why I'm talking all about why there are usually multiple SPNs. Either system admins didn't know where to put it and they just put it everywhere, and actually it doesn't work like that, as we talked about it. And or some other reason is, let's say we are moving our services from old server to the new server, and we forgot to move the SPNs, and we have both servers still living. So once I send this request to my domain controller, it goes through all the process. It sends the request, it gets a reply, and once I have all the tickets that I need, I present these tickets to my web server. And fully qualified domain name for this server is intranet.corp.korneki.net. And where do I register this SPN to? Well, it depends how this IIS is running. if this IIS is running as network service, under network service, then I have to register this SPN to the computer account of the server where IIS is running. I will show you some other examples. Once I'm authenticated, well, he needs to talk to this server. It knows it by its name, SQL cluster 1 in the domain. But actually it has to authenticate to the domain controller here. It has to go to the domain controller, said, okay, I want to talk to this guy here. It will check its SPN and got all the tickets, and it will represent these tickets here. Okay, let's move forward. If IIS service needs to talk to SQL, it needs to authenticate to DC. It must find SQL SPN. It will talk to DC about it. When it has that, okay, so here is how it's talking to the DC. SPN is AMS SQL Service Server 7 corp.carnegie.net. As mentioned, SPN doesn't have to match domain name. I'm just, DC must find this SPN, and this SPN has to be registered on this computer object. But that's not always the case. I will also talk about this in a second. If, let's say, SQL is running under custom service account, which it can, and often does, then SPN must be registered on that service account under which SQL is running, not on the computer object. I will show this as an example. And it's same thing if IIS is running under the custom service account. How can I run IIS under custom service account? I will just go, let's say, under application pool, and I will say identity. And I will just enter custom service account, and this website will now run as under this account, not anymore like network account, like by default. I can actually show this here. Let's see, my exchange should be somewhere around here. Here's my exchange, and these are my application pools. Let's see how they're running right now. They're running as a local system. So in this scenario, I would have to register SPN to the computer object in the ID, like I showed you on the domain controller. If I change this, right, and this can be changed very easily, I just go to custom account, set, let's say set, I will just enter, let's say, Miha. I can change this, and I would like to stress, I'm not recommending that you run IIS sites as administrator. Use very restricted users. But my point here today is just that if you do this, you have to remove the SPN that you registered on the computer account if you did it, and move that SPN to the user account that this site will run under. Otherwise, it won't work. And I can close this. So how do I register the SPN on this computer, now this user account? Let's say this was the administrator. I will just go here. Okay. Yes, I edit. I will just look for the user, let's say administrator. And this is just showing, again, this is not best practice to run IIS under this account. And I'm looking for SPN, service principal name. Do I have any filters on? I don't. Pretty service principal name. And what I have to actually enter here is whatever I need this service to listen on. Let's say intranet. That's how you do it. Okay, whatever. But this is how you do it. I won't troubleshoot this right now. Okay. I can troubleshoot this later. So again, what you need to remember is first you have to look how your SQL server is running. Is it running as a system? If it's running as a system, SPN must be registered on computer object. If you set your SQL server, and this is usually how it's done and it's best practice, if you set your SQL server to run as a special service that you dedicate for, let's say, for an instance, then you have to register SPN on that computer account. And same goes for IIS. If IIS is running as a local system or network service, then you have to register SPN on computer object. If you change how your IIS is running and you change it to run as a dedicated service account, and again that is best practice, then you have to register SPN on that computer, that dedicated computer account. Okay. So common scenarios and problems. If you change from computer account to network service, this is just what I talk about. Remove SPN from computer account and add it to the custom service. And always remember, there can only be one SPN name can one SPN name can only belong to one object. That same SPN cannot belong to two objects. Like I showed, SPN minus X, it showed doubled. That won't work. You can use set SPN X to test your environment. Easiest way to troubleshoot this, and this is something I do very, very often. And the easiest, unfortunately, the easiest way is to use network monitor, like I showed in the first parts of this presentation. And where do you now troubleshoot this setup? Right? I'm here, I want to talk to this guy, and all these guys are also involved. Where do I troubleshoot this? First, I install network monitor up here on the web server. And the one thing I want to know is how this user is trying to access this server. What SPN is it sending? Because here I will very commonly find that not the right SPNs are registered on the right objects, or SPNs are completely missing. And the easiest way for me to find without going to the code is to just install a network monitor and see what this user is sending. And you will see that as we saw in the first part of this presentation. You will see that as, let's say, not here. Let's try another one. Let's say, try this one. You will see it like this. You can filter by IP address, and you can say, okay, if you're coming from this client, then I want to show your Kerberos traffic, and so on, so on. And see, you can see, let's say here, CIFS Corp DC1, or it will actually look for HTTP in this case, or SQL service or something. Another way to do this is to install this network monitor here and see what client is sending, wherever it's sending. And you will see where it might... one thing that I often find is that there are SPNs missing, or they may be misspelled. Right? The admin try to put in the right value, but when we do the network trace, we find that it is misspelled. So again, you can install it on this computer, see what it's sending, but the last part, how do you troubleshoot, let's say, access between these two? This is also a very common mistake. Well, the easiest way, again, install network monitor here and see what this web server is sending to this SQL service when it's trying to reach it. You will see SPN inside. You can see if it's misspelled, or maybe it's not registered, maybe it's doubled, whatever other options are. So this is how it works inside domain. So when I want to talk to another domain, to another server in another domain, how do I do that? Well, again, I sent all the packets that we talked about already. In the packet is SPN, and what it happens is this C tries to find this SPN. If it can't find it in its own domain, what it will do is it will query global catalog. Global catalog knows all the SPNs inside forest. If it finds this SPN that we are looking for in the forest, it will send referral back to the client, and it will tell the client, go and talk to this domain controller in that domain. Client will connect to that domain controller, and it will go through the whole process again with all the requests, with all the replies. It needs a ticket granting ticket to that domain controller. Once it's received all the tickets, it will go and talk to the last server that it wanted to. How about across the forest? How do we know what forests there are that we can talk to with Kerberos? When we create, let's say, forest trust, we can use Kerberos over forest trust or external trusts. And when we want to talk to another forest, when I try to talk to a service, again, I'm talking to my domain controller first. It will check its TDO, or trusted domain object, that is created when I create a trust. In the trusted domain object, there are domain suffixes to the other forests. So if I have forest A.com and I want to talk to the B.com, my A.com domain controller will refer to its trusted domain object. It will find that there is a trust to the B.com forest. It knows its suffixes, and again it will send back the referral to the client. And it will say to the client, go and talk to the DC1 in B.com. Of course, DNS name resolution must be working now. Otherwise, I won't be able to send the mail. I won't be able to contact that domain controller because I won't be able to find it. DNS must be working here. Domain suffixes, information is stored in replication. When we are talking about trusted domain objects, and this information is actually stored in the global catalog. So all the domain controllers have this information. This is another thing that I already talked about. This is how long are my credentials valid. How long can I use them, and where can I use them? So this can be changed, and I can actually show this to you. I just need a second because my battery is running low. And what I need to do is, like I mentioned, by default both tickets are valid for 10 hours, and as mentioned, you can well, I guess I'm not plugging in. Oh yeah, okay. You can change this. I usually don't have too many demands to change this value because, as mentioned, if account is disabled, if this option, enforce user logon restrictions, is enabled, it will still check if account was disabled. If it was disabled, it won't allow logon after a couple of minutes. If we disable that option, I can actually, and I actually tested this, you can still log on after 10 hours to some server. You can do Alt Control Delete and send the credentials, but if I'm logged on and I have cached tickets, I can send those tickets and they're valid. Where can we find this? Actually, it's under account, under Kerberos policy. Because this is new policy, there is no default policy here, but I can go and change that. Let's say enforce user logon restriction is enabled, and I could go and change maximum lifetime for the service ticket is by default 10 hours and 10 hours. And user ticket cannot be shorter than, cannot be longer than service ticket. And what else? So there's another option if you have a lot of forest trusts and you want to have Kerberos with them, as mentioned, if you disable NTLM, like I said at the beginning, if you disable NTLM, we want to talk to the other servers or the other forests with Kerberos. We can use forest search order. This is actually client setting. This policy has to either be set on server, that is Windows 2008 R2, or Windows 7 client. If DC can't find SPN that I'm looking for, it will try the other forests that are entered here. Let's say forest 1, forest 2, forest 3. If I have 5 forests in there, it will go and try all 5 forests. If it fails, it fails. It's actually it's sort of workaround. It's not the best option because it will any SPN that it cannot find in its own database, in its own forest, it will just forward it to the other forests. There's actually one question that I have after all this. I'm almost finished with this, but let's say if I do this, what protocol am I using? MTLM, always MTLM. And you should actually understand now why. Because there is no SPN with this name attached to any object. If I do, let's say, this, I'm using Kerberos because there is SPN registered with this name. These are actually quite a lot of this is quite an issue usually when we try to disable NTLM because a lot of users or a lot of companies have network shares mapped to their IPs. If you disable NTLM, those shares won't work at all. No way. And the only way to fix that actually is to change that and use the names instead of the IP addresses to map network drives. Okay, so before you switch off to pure Kerberos, make sure it's working and it's not falling back to NTLM. You can use some auditing tools that are included in the Windows to see when you're using NTLM and when you are using Kerberos, and what you can do to change that so it doesn't fall back. Again, I would like to stress that one of the most common problems that I see when I'm troubleshooting Kerberos is are SPNs. If you have problem with SPNs, Kerberos will not work. If you have double SPNs or they are missing or they are misspelled, Kerberos will fail and it will fall back to NTLM right now. And the easiest way to troubleshoot this is to use Network Monitor and see what client is sending, what SPNs our client is sending, and if it's failing, why it's failing. You can actually see when the domain controller is replying, there will be an error, and you can use that as, let's say, something to search on. It might say, okay, SPN not found, or some other error if there are double SPNs and doesn't know which accounts to use. So if there are any questions, I hope. Yes, please. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There cannot be multiple SPN. If you do that, if you register the same SPN on different accounts, Kerberos will not work, not ever. Well, one way would be to use the same account to on different pools, application pools, but that's not the best option. But let's say, just a second, if you do this, if I'm trying to go to, let's say, HTTP intranet, there will be only one application pool usually for this address. Do you agree? Sorry? Why would I want to use, let's say, different pools for this address? Yes, I will then have, let's say, this HTTP in intranet 1. Do you agree? No? Why not? Oh, okay. I understand now. You mean like this, let intranet test 1 and test 2 then and so on. What would be the best option? I don't know. I would have to sit down and think about it, but I'm sure there is a way around it. Not application, always the server. Yeah, I agree, but I'm sure there is a way around it. I would have to sit down and think about it. I don't have one out of my sleeve. I'm sorry. But if you want, we can talk about this offline after I'm done. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, please. KDC, domain controller, is checking all the time. Domain controller does. Before, actually, I'm not sure. I would have to check that. In general, the server will check if I send the correct values. I'm not sure if it will check if I send the if my account is disabled, but it will check if I send the correct data inside. But I think the user, before it sends the ticket to the server, it will go and talk to the domain controller. I am almost certain that the server that I'm talking to, let's say server 1, is not checking with the domain controller. It would be the client side. Client would be checking with the DC if it's okay, and then talk to the final server. Yeah. Yeah. I guess you could for 10 hours. That's how that's by default how long the ticket is valid for 10 hours by default. You can lower this down to, I think, 1 hour. But if I'm not sure, but I'm 99% sure that the server will never go and ask DC, is this correct? This would beat the purpose of Kerberos. NTLM does works like that. And, when I'm authenticated with NTLM, I'm sending my credentials to the server, and server checks with DC, and then it says, okay, it's okay to talk to me or not. When I'm using Kerberos, I have to talk to the DC first. I have to specify what service I want to talk to, and then go talk to the server. I'm not sure how the restrictions are here, but there are. I actually tested this in an environment, and my guess would be that I go to the DC and check is it still okay to use this ticket. And let's look at this trace I remembered. Let's say I want to talk. This is from the same computer, and I'm talking to LDAP all the time. Even if my ticket is cached, I'm always checking back. I checked here 3 times in 30 seconds. Do you agree? This would be the same if I'm trying to access any other service. This is log. What I captured here is Logon process, and I need to, let's say, connect to LDAP on one server. It's called Corp DC1, and I sent my request 3 times. And this could just as well be I want to connect there. Am I allowed? What I can do for you is, if you drop me an email, I will gladly look into this in more details. Any other questions? Yes, please. Go ahead. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, usually, I'm not sure. It depends on the settings of the website. What you will usually have, let's say, form where you enter username and password. Integrated still, even if you're on the intranet. And do you have VPN or? So you just enter the intranet and it will log you on. Probably, my first guess would be, and I could be wrong, is that you have, let's say, remember the password on the browser, and the browser is authenticating you. I can't see how this would work otherwise. Actually, there is one way. If you have in the IE, if I take my IE, let's take this one, and if I add, let's say I'm going to this HTTP, because you're on the intranet, you have to enter fully qualified domain name. Let's say intranet.domain.com, right? If this address is entered here into the intranet zone, if it's entered under the local intranet, automatically log on only in the intranet zone. So this address, fully qualified domain name address, is actually have to be under intranet zone. What it does, it takes your credentials that you logged on, even in the cached mode, and presents it to the site. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's Kerberos because you're offline, but if it's not Kerberos, it's still integrated because it's using the credentials that you entered when you logged on, even in cache mode. Okay? Please. By default, the server that when you joined it to the domain, by default it will register its name, short name, or net bias name, and fully qualified domain name. Under the host, if this is DC, it will also add LDAP. It will also add others, and there's a setting in domain that adds additional names and maps them to the host name. So if it is host/DC1, this also let's say does SPN registration for other. Let's say if I call DHCP/DC1, it is the same as I'm doing for the host/DC1. There are other services behind it. This is called SPN mappings, and it's actually called alias. So actually AD defines what names will be registered by default. Others you have to register either manually or allow service the permission to register it. Let's say when you install SQL, it will try and register correct SPN under correct object. The only question is does the service that the SQL is running under has the permission to do so? If it doesn't, you have to do it manually. Other than that, there are actually a list of services that are registered depending on what is running on the server. Well, that's usually most common that I can find is the human error or admin error. Let's say one way would be I have a server 1 and I rename it to server 1 old, and I introduce new server 1. SPN stayed with the old server, and because I'm replacing it and I want the new server with the new name to take that role, I need to register the SPN on it, but I didn't remove the old one. You need to clean it up. I would suggest to all of you here that listen to this presentation, go home, go to your environments and run set SPN -x. I'm sure that not all of you will find any duplicates, but I'm sure some of you will. And let's say that's one example. Also, let's say server 1 burned down, and you didn't, let's say, delete the server account in the domain and introduce the new server, and so on. So there are a lot of scenarios. Another common would be, let's say, a customer decided to move from running SQL or IIS under computer account, and they move to, let's say, service account, dedicated service account. And let's say they either forget to move SPN to the new account, or they registered it under the new account and forgot to clean up. Please. Mm-hmm. Still, the problem is the domain controller just checks if there is SPN in the network. Even if you disable the account, it will still find the SPNs, and it will find 2. And as soon as it finds 2, the problem is it doesn't know which computer password to use to protect, to create as a master key to protect the, let's say, session keys. And it will just fail. It will send the error back. The problem is that actually this is something I ran into recently, mostly in the lab. I can register 2 SPNs, probably on 2 different domain controllers in 2 sites. And it will actually work for a little while. And this little while is as long as replication doesn't run. This can be either from anywhere from 15 minutes to 3 hours. Then it will start failing. The problem is I'm sitting in the customer site. I registered the SPN. It works. I leave. And 4 hours later, they call me and said it doesn't work anymore. So that's why I very commonly ran set SPN -X. Okay? Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Okay. It repairs SPNs, yes. It will update them and change them. So renaming the domain, any server will actually update the SPNs. Let's say I can look, let's see something. That might be interesting because it's related to these questions. Properties. Okay, here is one example. This one will never change. The one that I marked. Let's say I can actually do this. If I take this part, I can do this. Actually, this should be he should find this. Interesting. Okay. This is actually the GUID of the domain controller. And the GUID of the domain controller never changes even if you rename the server. It always stays the same. But it will change, let's say, RODC test, it will rename it to RODC test X. But there are parts of it that will never change. Any other questions? Well, I will be here for a couple of minutes. So if you have any questions offline, I'm available. Other than that, again, my email address if you want to ask me anything on the email. This presentation will be available online. I will send it to Andre. And other than that, I hope you learned something useful here today. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.